Dr. Joe, how are you?
I'm doing very well, thanks.
Super. I- I- Are they real books behind you, or is that a green screen?
No, those are real books. This is my office here at the church.
Oh, wow. Yes. I s- I always have to ask because
Yeah,
believe
you
it or
never
not,
you.
this is this is my real office.
Never-
So your colleague, sorry, his name escapes me.
Isaac.
Isaac, yes, of course. Um, he approached me and said, "Chris, would you be interested in having the doctor on your show?" Da 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 da. And I watched the clip of is it JD Vance was
Yes,
socking it to some journalist who was,
yes.
you know, I call it doing her bit for the Satanists.
Okay.
And she was saying, like, you don't know where this immigrant got radicalized. And Vance says, I don't care where he's radicalized. I don't want him in my country. So I thought that it could be a good chat.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yeah.
And
That's a.
sorry, friends at home, Dr. Joe Rigney, um, a man with very many hats, um, fellow of theology at New St Andrews College. Apologies, Doctor. I've got to read off the screen. I've got a brain like a scrambled egg. Author of 7 books and also a teacher at Desiring God, professor and president of Bethlehem College. Um,
Yes. That
and,
was
and,
before.
and
Those were the things before I moved here to do. Now I'm a fellow of theology. I used to be a professor at another school, and now I'm here. And yeah. So I so this new book, Scent of Empathy, is a little bit of a provocative one, I think, So, but I think Isaac got it right to see some of the applications that we can see in the political realm for sure, in the way that our leaders often try to weaponize our compassion in order to do things that otherwise would not get done. And the immigration one is actually a really great example of the sort of thing that I have in mind speaking about the sin of empathy.
yes, Roger. Um, so I guess maybe a quote I heard once is kind of relevant in this scenario. It was, how do you help a sick person? Don't be sick.
Yeah, right.
How do you help an impoverished person? Don't be impoverished. You know, how do you help your country? Don't trash it into an undeveloped third world state. Just, um, am I
That's
sort
right.
of, is that
You're
relevant?
you're in the ballpark. So yeah, one of the illustrations I like to use is if you see someone drowning, there's sort of three basic responses that you could have to they're in suffering, they're in distress. The first is what we typically call indifference or apathy, where they're drowning and you're on the side and you don't care at all. You just turn your back and you walk on. The second, which is the response that we ought to have, is we want to get in and help them. We want to help them get out. So if they're drowning in a river, we might grab a life preserver, dive in, swim it to them, and then help swim them back. But we're going to have that life preserver, and it's going to be tethered to something on the shore. The last response is we could just jump in and drown ourselves. And in the modern world, I think that the term empathy often refers to that third response. It's a demand that you sort of totally immerse yourself in the suffering of others to the point that you lose touch with what is true and with what is good, with what is wise. You lose touch with reality. And so, if the first bad response on one side is apathy, and the other one is empathy, the response that I'm asking for, the thing that I think we should have, as I'm a Christian pastor, the thing we should have is sympathy or compassion. That's the proper, faithful response, and one that will actually help others rather than simply being swept along by their emotions, by their feelings, and being swept off our feet into all kinds of folly and destruction.
Where, where do you think it will lead then if we continue down this road?
Well, so you mentioned that J.D. Vance about immigration, and I know this is an issue in both of our countries. We have a substantial immigration problem, and I actually saw a really good illustration of this the other day. A friend sent me an image from the southern border of the United States of the wall, the border wall, and on the border wall was written on the Mexico side of it was written the word empathy, as sort of an attack on the idea that you should have a border. And I think that's a really actually good illustration of the sort of thing that I'm after, in that if you get swept away by kind of untethered empathy that's not anchored to anything, then you're not allowed to have borders. You're not allowed to have boundaries. You simply have to be open to anything and everything and everyone, because that's what compassion supposedly demands. That's what empathy demands. And so the end result is, depending on the situation, you're going to have all sorts of dysfunction, destruction. It's going to be toxic. It's going to be suicidal. So these days you hear a lot of folks beginning to recognize, I think, the dangers of feelings untethered from reality and the way that they're weaponized by opportunists. So there are people who have realized that in a post-Christian society, a society that had substantial foundations in the Christian scriptures and in the gospel of Jesus, that the Bible tells us that we're to be kind and compassionate. We're to be like Christ. We're supposed to imitate him, and he was compassionate, and that his compassion is what led him to come to earth and die on a cross for the sins of the world. But Chesterton once said that the modern world is full of the old Christian virtues gone mad because they've become separated. And so pity, sympathy, compassion, whatever you want to call it, becomes very untruthful. It's willing to lie. It's willing to blaspheme. It's willing to do all sorts of things. It becomes untethered from justice and from truth, and therefore becomes highly destructive. It becomes a weed, a man-eating weed that devours everything in its path, because we don't have the kind of boundaries, we don't have the clear-headedness, we're not able to be sober-minded and assess what's actually good and right in this situation, because we're so fixated on the immediate feelings of whatever suffering person or group is being put before us.
Gosh, yes. At our own at the expense of our mental health and our communities.
Correct.
Yes. Kind of crazy when you think about it.
Yes.
I'm just going to play this clip. I hope I don't get into trouble with YouTube, but, hey ho. This is definitely a clip, folks, for, I think, it's titled President Trump Attends National Prayer Service. And this is, what's her correct title, Doctor?
She's a bishop, she's a lady bishop of the National Cathedral.
Yeah.
In Washington, D.C.
Yeah,
right.
We get it. And I really think she's delivering this speech to the wrong. I'm not a voter, folks. I think it's all nonsense. But I really think she's delivering this speech to the wrong person. I'm not going to play all of it. I'll play the second half of it.
There are gay, lesbian, and transgender children in Democratic, Republican, and independent families. Some who fear for their lives. And the people who pick our crops and clean our office buildings, who labor in poultry farms and meat packing plants, who wash the dishes after we eat in restaurants and work the night shifts in hospitals, they may not be citizens or have the proper documentation, but the vast majority of immigrants are not criminals. They pay taxes.
I'm just going to stop it there, Joe. The vast majority of illegal immigrants are not criminals. I think the clue there is in the word illegal.
Yeah, right.
Folks, I'm not laughing at the, I don't blame anyone who wants a better life for themselves. I've had a passport to travel the whole world several times. I'm just laughing at the notion here that as your country is literally being destroyed, the USA, the United Kingdom, or England, whichever you favour, England, Ireland, Scotland and Wales, I should say. Sweden is already, I think, damaged beyond repair, with Malmö now having no-go areas for and being branded the rape capital of Europe. It's farcical how everyone buys into this agenda. Joe, should we talk about that? Why? And one last thing. When I was at university, I studied 5.5 years at university. I started with youth work. I did a degree in youth and community work. And you get all this kind of, I just call it indoctrination. And I was working in immigration. I had to do a placement with asylum seekers, and some of them were very genuine. They'd come across countries in the back of a truck with just, a litre of water and this horror stories. But one guy, I took him for his new job. I dropped him off, and he turned around and he said, "I'm going to make this much money this week, Chris." I said, "Oh, no, you're not, because you got to report what you earn to the employment people, the benefits office, and they're going to take the money that you earn out of your benefits." He looked at me and said, "I hate this country." And you've got all your, I'm just going to use the word lefty liberal. I don't even really know what that means, if I was honest, but you got all these liberal students go, "Oh, you got to welcome all these people into your country and you cannot question a single thing, or that makes you a racist bigot sort of thing." So why are humans subject to fighting this cause, even though they clearly have no idea the dangers of where it could lead for them and their communities?
Yeah, so I think a big part of it is that compassion and kindness are obviously good things, and so they're things that sharing the sufferings of others, or seeing someone in distress and being moved with pity or compassion for them is a very natural human response. It's one that God commends. He designed us this way to be able to. The Bible, for example, tells us that we're to weep with those who weep and rejoice with those who rejoice. But because it's such a good thing, because it's the sort of thing that is a really noble virtue, when it goes wrong, it goes really wrong. One of the things I learned from a Brit, from C.S. Lewis, is that the best things, when they go wrong, become demonic. Now, Lewis actually has a whole book devoted to this phenomenon called The Four Loves, in which he takes things like the natural love for your family, or your love for your friends, or romantic love, and he says basically these are all good natural things, but if they don't have God's love on the reins, if divine love does not govern it, all of these will become demonic. All of these will become devouring monsters, which will destroy your life. And we can think about that. Lewis loved to show a picture of what he called the maternal vampire, which he said it was the sort of woman who lived for others, and you could always tell the others by their hunted expression, right? Where is she? She's after us. And so there's this notion that good things, when they become unmoored or untethered or unanchored from reality, become very highly destructive. And I think that's what we see with things like mercy and compassion. So that bishop is appealing to President Trump and Vice President Vance and saying, have mercy on all of these groups of people. But if we actually drill into what does she mean by that? What mercy is she offering to them? We actually discover that it's not actually very merciful. So the idea is, or it's selectively merciful, it's selectively kind. So we need to say welcome all of the immigrants from everywhere. But we're not going to give any thought to the destruction and the disorder that might cause on the people who are already here, right? So you see the kind of the failure of kind of leftist compassion when you see the breakdown of the family. You go to areas that have been run for many years by liberals and progressives, And what will you find? You'll find the breakdown of the family. You'll find failing schools. You'll find rampant crime and drug use. You'll find enfeebling dependence on government aid. And all of this in the name covered over by this idea of empathy or compassion. And if you go even beyond that, right, I know that in our country, at least, we've had a major challenge with this. I'm not sure as much how it's going in the UK. But in the name of compassion, we were told that what we must do to children who are confused about their so-called gender identity, we must give them puberty blockers and castrate them. In the name of compassion. Compassion demands that we cut off healthy organs, healthy sexual organs in service of insane ideologies, and all of it covered by compassion. Or, again, in the name of compassion, we have to, let in as many migrants as possible and destroy social order and cohesion in the name of compassion. And so all of these are things that are done in the name of something that is really good. So I don't want people to misunderstand. I'm actually in favor of real compassion. But I think real compassion actually looks at what's good for people, what's good for society, what's good for the individual, what's good for the community, and it takes all of that into account as it tries to do as much good as possible. The modern virtue, so-called virtue of empathy, is really often a tool of emotional manipulation and emotional blackmail. Like you said, if it either do what we say, enact this social policy, or you're a bigot, you're a racist, you're a hater, you're a misogynist. Pick your term, and those terms become kind of like steering wheels on our backs, because what the progressives have learned is people don't like to be called names. You'll jump through a lot of hoops to prove I'm not a bad person, according to this new modern definition of goodness. And so I think that's the play that's been run, and it's been very effective. And I think part of what's needed is for people of common sense, especially Christians, should be willing to be called bad names, be actually compassionate to love your neighbor, including the neighbor who's lived here their whole lives and whose community is being destroyed. Love your neighbor, and grow a backbone.
Yes, I'm just writing a couple of notes down here so I don't forget. Sorry, Doctor. I think we should come up with some examples just so people out there that might be a bit on the fringe of what we're talking about can get it. And I just want to chuck one in there because I saw on Twitter, or X as it now is, I saw Elon actually was socking it to this journalist he was like, what have you what have you got against sending another $8 trillion to Ukraine or whatever the astronomical figure that's been sent that could be used like for actual peace, the thing that Jesus preached. And Elon just turned around and he does come out with some classics, and he said something like, because I don't believe in prolonging the slaughter of, and this was his words, and I'm paraphrasing as well, but it was like, thousands upon thousands of young men and children, and in the name of virtue signaling.
Right. No, and virtue signaling actually is a really interesting way to look at this, because often what happens when this sort of fake virtue takes root, it becomes very easy to signal your virtue. You just put up a flag in your biography. You make the right post and you check the box of I'm a good person, as opposed to actually doing the difficult work of caring for real people. And oftentimes what we find in these situations is when empathy goes wrong, it becomes very myopic. Certain people are worthy objects of empathy, and certain other groups are not. It becomes very selective. So you asked for examples. I think one of the more interesting ones is this is a major issue in the United States in our rhetoric around abortion, because oftentimes the way that abortion is justified is in the name of compassion for desperate women, women who are pregnant and in desperate circumstances, either financially or in the worst case scenarios. Often the heartstrings that get tugged the most is this woman is the victim of rape and she's pregnant with her rapist child. And obviously that's a great moral evil, and the man who perpetrated it ought to be thrown in jail and perhaps more. But what gets lost in the discussion is the unborn child. No compassion is reserved for the unborn child. Instead, all of the compassion is directed at one person. And in the name of compassion for that pregnant woman, we can do great evils to this unseen, unborn, but real human being in the womb who can now be dismembered at will in the name of compassion. And so it becomes highly selective. It's, again, we go back to immigration, and you're going to get, if at this point in our country, at least, as the Trump administration actually is attempting to do something about the millions and millions of illegal migrants who have been allowed to flood into our country, and they're now beginning to deport them, and they're starting with the worst of the worst, the gang members, the rapists, those who have committed additional crimes to illegally crossing the border. They're deporting them, and what's the response from the media? It's going to be sob stories. It's going to be, look at these poor people that we're sending back to other countries. And again, it's selective. We're supposed to feel compassion for the migrant, but what about the victim of that migrant's crime? What about the women who have been raped in our country, or the women who have been raped in your country? What about the people who've been murdered by illegal immigrants? What about those who have, illegal immigrants have committed a number of vehicular challenges? They haven't driven well, and as a result, people have died. Where's the compassion for those? And so it becomes highly selective and myopic, and it fixates on certain groups to the exclusion of others. And that's how you know it's become untethered and unmoored from reality, because true compassion is going to take into account all of those factors. It's going to say, yes, there are places in the world that are really, really hard to live in, but there's also really big problems here at home. And can we continue to afford to send all of this money to other places while we have massive issues in our own countries, in our own nations, in our own communities that are going unaddressed? Those are the kinds of questions that are short-circuited. We can't even have that conversation, because to object to some of these social policies is to be heartless and cruel and callous, and nobody wants to be called those names.
Yes, it's funny, Joe, on that note, I've just remembered this is the chat that we're not allowed to have on the platform that we're talking about. So, and we are going to have it, but I just want to say that to anybody watching, we're not stereotyping every immigrant, whether they be legal or illegal. Right. Not at all. We know the vast majority of people that enter a country without a passport are probably bloody lovely people that you'd absolutely, get on well with. We're focusing on the crime that does take place. We're focusing on the strain it's putting on our services and our economy, etc., etc. And I think that's a, valid conversation to have. I'm going to come up with another example, Doctor. At what point did we not only let, I don't even know the terminology, but transgender people into sport, but not just into sport, but biological men into women's sport, where they obviously are going to win? When did we get so dumb? How did we get so well, not we obviously, but society?
Yeah. I think this is the end result of this kind of abandonment of reason, abandonment of reality, and the elevation of a person's feelings that trump every other consideration. It trumps your feelings trump biological reality. And so in this case, a person feels in their heart that they are in the wrong body. And what we have now demanded that compassion, and they're very distressed about this. This is very hard for them. And so now, in the name of compassion, we are going to reorganize our entire society to cater to these, I would say, mentally unwell, mentally deranged people. And in some cases, I do think that the response ought to be just compassion. It must be a very difficult thing. But in other cases, what I think people have done is they've sensed opportunity. They've sensed that if they adopt this ideology, they can get their way. Society will cater to them. In fact, this is one of the main destructive elements of this untethered empathy, is you begin orienting society around the most reactive, immature, and insane members of society. They set the agenda for everybody else, and everybody else has to cater to them. And so if this man wants to compete in women's sports and he wants to wear a dress or something like that, then society says, well, we have to let him do it. And it is absolutely insane. I do think that some of the roots of it, I appreciate that some feminists even have recognized the end result of this, that they've begun to resist. But I do think that feminism as an ideology is the roots of some of these moves. Is if you begin to say that men and women are interchangeable, which was the feminist proposition, was to say that men and women, there are no differences, meaningful differences between men and women. Eventually, someone says, we believe you. And so now there's no meaningful differences between men and women in sports, in showers, in restrooms. All of those places are places where there is no difference. But if we're going to reject the transgender insanity, we have to go deeper and say men and women actually are different. And they're different in really great ways that complement one another. Men set the perimeter. Men are like to draw clear lines. They're oriented towards things and ideas in particular ways. And women are life givers and nurturers. And that's why men make fathers and women make mothers. And both are important. You need both, but they are very different, and they need to work together, accenting their own particular strengths and compensating for their particular weaknesses together in order to have a healthy society. And what feminism did is it said, we're not allowed to do that. We're not allowed to make distinctions between men and women. And then they've sowed those seeds of interchangeability and said men and women are interchangeable. And then they don't like the fruit that they're now reaping from those seeds. The fruit that's coming up is Bruno in the girls' locker room. The fruit that's coming up is a man winning all of the gold medals in the women's sports. That's the fruit of that lie. And if we're going to resist it, we have to go all the way down to the roots. It's not going to be enough to try to trim around the edges.
Yes, it's also, Joe, it's a crime against women, because if you take a mother, out of motherhood and put her in work, and the baby goes to a, what do you call it, a nanny or daycare, or we know that psychologically traumatizes an infant, and it separates this all important bond. And the same goes with the father. I mean, the most important person, I would say, certainly going on my own, manhood, is your father, and all kinds of crap. When you disrupt that relationship, it doesn't end well. And so, all these young girls who've been traumatized since birth through this, I think Jordan Peterson actually summed this one up well when he was battling that journalist, and he said, no, I'm saying that, men and women are equal, but there's some things that men are just better at, some things women are better at, and some things that both of them, they just want to do. Not a lot of women really want to dig the roads, whereas guys are like, well, it's work, it's man's work, and so on and so forth. So, yes. And can we talk, I noticed in some of your write-up, you mentioned Babylon and Rome. And is this a case of, should we learn from history, do you think?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that one of the things you see in the great, empires, tyrannical empires of the past, is the way that they typically are. The way they collapse is not first by foreign invasion, um, but by a lack of self-will. They commit suicide. They're not murdered. They commit suicide. Now, in the end result is the barbarians overwhelm them. That's actually what happens. But it's because they've grown sick, and what the sickness might be different, but oftentimes, um, it's their virtues that were their downfall. The virtues that they had that began to then be corrupted and twisted, that then led to their great downfall. So Rome had great ambitions and therefore overextended itself, and then needed more taxes, and so started conferring citizenship on all sorts of people that then, in order to boost the tax revenues, uh, and as a result, weakened themselves to the point where they didn't know who they were. And I think you see a similar thing in the West today, where I think that there is a real identity crisis. What does it mean to be an American? This was the major debate, I think, underneath a lot of our political debates in our last election. But underneath it is, what does it mean to be an American? Is there such a thing as an American? I think you see a similar thing in Europe. What does it mean to be British? What does it mean to be English? What does it mean to be French? What are these identities? Is it simply a matter of being in a particular geographic location, and that's it? And maybe in our case, maybe holding to certain ideas. Or can you simply, again, this interchangeability idea that you can simply substitute a person from one place for a person another, and there be no difference. And this is the great modern folly of, it's a perversion of that equality idea that you mentioned, right? So yes, all human beings are made in God's image. They have dignity, they have worth, they have value, and therefore are equal in one sense. But they are very different. Cultures are different, nations are different, peoples are different. And you can't simply sub one for the other and expect everything to stay the same. It won't work. And eventually the bill will come due, and we'll discover that you can't import, say, millions of North Africans or millions of Asians, millions of South Americans, or what have you, and have the same country you had before. It won't work that way. The old word for that was an invasion. It was colonization. If we were reading history, that's what we would call what we're looking at now. Now, it may be voluntary colonization, right? We're inviting people in to colonize us, but it is the same nevertheless.
Yes, I don't think anyone watching my show believes this is all by accident.
Right.
I'll come on to that. Do you think there's conversations here, Doctor, that are like humans just, it's not even that we're not ready to have them, it's just like we're not capable of having them because they posit, if that's the right word, really tough scenarios.
It sounds like you're talking about the benefits of having positive things or qualities. To clarify, could you tell me more about what
They're always listening.
Yeah, that's it. I've just been messing around with AI in the last sort of month. It's it's an interesting arena, but it is funny when Gemini comes on. She came on in the car the other day, and I was out with my family. We absolutely creased up. But yeah, I mean, for example, and guys, you can hate me as much as you like. It's irrelevant. I don't actually exist. But the disabled, and this is not like my suggestion. I'm raising this the situation as in, is it a healthy society that caters to every single person's wishes? God, this is a tough one. This is a tough cookie. And what I mean by that is, let's just say you have someone with Down syndrome. They want to get married. Yeah, absolutely fine, obviously. And then the modern take is, well, if they wish to have children, that's their right. And I guess you could say, yeah, absolutely. You could also say, like, would that really be a reality if we were in a society that was hell bent on, preserving ourselves? Because that child then has to be looked after by, in all likelihood, will be looked after by the state. That's your taxpayers, mine, and it's not just about the money. It's about then that person needs a home. That home is built from materials that probably aren't sustainable, and suddenly you've got this whole, I'm just wondering if we're coming back to the Roman Babylon thing, where if you, and I know this sounds like a eugenics argument for eugenics, folks. It's not that at all. I'm just saying this is the way that we're going. What would your thoughts be on that, Joe?
Yeah, so I think I think in a normal, healthy, functioning society, especially one that's been influenced by and grounded in the Christian scriptures, it has the room and the capacity to address things like disability and sort of what you might call normal hardships. That's one sort of issue. But I think the question so what I would put back in that scenario is, I do think that society is able in certain respects to care very well for the weak, the disabled, those who have no way to provide for themselves. But it can't do that if it's not healthy, right? It's sort of like a healthy, if you put it in the terms of a household, if a household, if a mother and father have a great relationship, they're able to care well for 3, 4, 5, 6, whatever kids that God gives. They're able to provide for them. But what they wouldn't be able to do is if you said, hey, here's 4 healthy kids, and then now you have a child with a disability. Can you manage that? A healthy society says, a healthy family says, sure, we can do that. It'll be hard, but life is hard, and we'll trust the grace of God to do it. But now imagine if you had 4 healthy kids, and then you added the disabled child, and then you said, oh, and in addition to that, we need you to look after 25 foster kids as well. In that scenario, it doesn't matter how healthy or how good the parental relationship is, it's just not going to get done. And I think that's what is actually happening in our present situation, is that the problems and the hardships that a normal, healthy nation would be able to address, the things that we would be able to provide for those who couldn't provide for themselves, are actually being limited because we are creating more problems. We're saying we need to import everybody else's problems in addition to our own, rather than if we were healthy and we took care of our business, then we might be able to export that health to other places. We might be able to be a kind of model to commend these are healthy, normal ways of operating. These are godly ways of operating to other societies, to other nations, which could then imitate and learn from it. But instead, what we've chosen to do is we've said, all of the dysfunction elsewhere, we're going to import it here and then hope it goes well. And what we're discovering is it doesn't go well.
Yes. Sorry, folks, I meant no disrespect to anybody out there, and I don't mean any offense. Like I say, there's tough conversations that I think that have almost become taboo, and we haven't even kind of had those conversations. Okay. Doctor, are you familiar with biological Leninism?
Describe it, and maybe I might be familiar with it. It doesn't ring a bell, but I'm curious to hear what it is.
Well, one of my sort of bugbears is when it comes to the nature of the topics we've been talking about, for example, the rampant illegal immigration. People think it stops with the government, like this. I think our Prime Minister's called Keir Starmer. People think like it's because of him. Like if we could just get rid of him, all of this would stop. etc. And I'm sort of more of the opinion that this is an agenda. I think when you play a game, and in this case the game is life, there's always someone that wants to win, or in this case a group. I think whereas you, Doctor, favour the wispy white-haired bearded chap on the cloud, I think they favour the pointy-horned one. And I think biological Leninism is what we're seeing, and the implementation of it. I'm not saying it's a continuation of the Soviet era or anything like that. So you had Lenin came to power, and he was the workers' guy, wasn't he? He was get the impoverished up, get the marginal, the proletariat, the people, get them to sort of rise up. And always traditionally the power structure had been people came to power because they kind of wanted to do a good job for their country. They had, they usually were financially self-sufficient, so that wasn't, they weren't subject to things like blackmail and bribery, and they would, they had to do the job of looking after their people. And what Leninism did was kind of, it took that kind of power from this structure and it put it into the people. And then what biological Leninism does, which is this modern thing that we're seeing, is it puts the power in the hands of disenfranchised people. So, sexuality, gender, skin color, Black Lives Matter, all the stuff that we're seeing. And the idea, one of the ideas and the reason why it's so dangerous is if you get accepted, let's say, by a political party, the left, they love, gay Rastafarians, and they're going to get protected status and Well, you might be a gay Rastafarian, and when when you get a paper put in your hand and you got to sign up for the next war, and we're going to go and bomb this country that's never done anything to us, you'll conveniently overlook that and you sign it because you've kind of found a family. Is this making much sense?
Yeah, so I think we in our context we typically, it's a similar idea. We people will talk about cultural Marxism, which I think is the same sort of phenomenon, where basically what Marx and Lenin saw in terms of economic classes, the proletariat versus the capitalists, those who had the power. You've seen an expansion of this into various other aggrieved groups, and the result is what I've affectionately called the victimhood Olympics. Where what we've basically done is arrange society in such a way that the greatest victim wins. The person who can establish themselves as the greatest victim of oppression gets to be put in charge of everything else. Everybody will orient to them. And I actually think this is part of what's behind the transgender phenomenon, is that for especially for women, the rise in the way that the social contagion of transgenderism just flooded through young girls was especially young white girls who had been told and catechized that you're the oppressor, right? All of the peoples of the world have been oppressed by you as a white person. And this was very hard to deal with emotionally. No one wanted to think of themselves this way. But then all of a sudden this out was created. Whereas if all of a sudden you're no longer just a white girl, but if you realize that in fact you are a man, then you go from being the oppressor in the hierarchy to immediately you're one of the most oppressed, because you're now a transgendered, quote unquote, man. And I think that there was a perverse incentive structure created that really appealed to people. If you don't like feeling guilty for being the oppressor, there's a way out. Now, one of the ways out might be just support all of the victim classes, do whatever they say. Or you could actually try to become one of the victim classes, become transgender, adopt different ideologies, and all of a sudden you are at the top of the pyramid rather than the bottom. Now you are the one who's in the seat to call the shots. And I think that inverted hierarchy it's a very similar idea to what you were just describing, and is how we got to where we are. That was the ideology that worked its way deep into the system of the West, and that we've seen play out over the last 10 to 20 years.
Absolutely. It's also that if someone is confused about their gender or their orientation, then if Jesus was here, he'd be encouraging them to love themselves, to realize that we're all born different. We all have some, every person on this planet has a quirk about their body that they probably wish they didn't have, etc., or confused thoughts at some time in their life, or maybe not even confused. But before we get, youngsters, and by youngster I mean anyone under the age of 40, because I'm 55 now and I'm still, totally irresponsible when it comes to, thinking. But before we encourage youngsters to go chopping bits off their body, for Christ's sake, that you can never reverse that. We should first be, saying, love yourself for who you are. Yes, you are unique, but that's the beauty of it. And one of the traps that, going back to the biological Leninism, is that we're encouraging people to live in their ego, aren't we? That, oh my God, I'm so important. This is all about me, and Whereas, a Christic take or a spiritual take would be, no, leave your ego behind, and you've got to, transcend that to access spirit.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. So I think the biological Leninism, cultural Marxism, is in some ways a false gospel. It says that the problem is all of your circumstances. The problem is society is oppressing you, and it offers hope and restoration through the reorganization of society, and in this case, the transformation of your body through surgeries. That's the hope of salvation. And in contrast to that, the Christian gospel comes and says, you have great dignity and worth because God made you. You are made by God, you're unique, and God made you. At the same time, you are broken. You're a sinner. You've violated the law of God. You've put yourself at the center of your life. You are a deeply selfish person. That's who you are. So you're good in the sense that God made you, and you're broken. You're sinful because you've put yourself at the center. And then what Christ comes and says is, I've died to take care of all of that sin stuff. I've paid the penalty for it, and now I'm inviting you to die to yourself. Put your ego to death. Put yourself to death, and come to me, and I will satisfy your soul. I will be the bread of life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. Christ offers himself to us out of his compassion and great mercy, and says, I will fill you up. I will make you more than you ever dreamed possible. In fact, he even promises, I will raise you from the dead. Death will not be the last word for you. If you trust me, just simple faith, simple trust, simple crying out to Christ. That's the hope of the Christian gospel. It's a salvation from outside of ourselves, not from within. And it's one that actually owns up to the way that we have contributed to many of our own problems. We are the biggest problem that we face. I love it. G.K. Chesterton was once asked to contribute to an essay series where the prompt was, what's wrong with the world? What's wrong with the world? And they invited a number of different contributors to write essays on what's wrong with the world. And G.K. Chesterton wrote back a very simple essay. And he said, Dear sir, I am G.K. Chesterton. And I think that more people have to recognize that the biggest problem in your life is you, and that the gospel offers the hope that Christ will fix it. He will change you. He will transform you. That's the great hope of the Christian gospel, and it's 1,000 times different and better than whatever the world has to offer. So maybe that's a good place that we can end it.
Yes, Doctor. fascinating to have you on the show. Thanks very much for joining me.
Yes.
Yes, that's it. I would I was going to ask you where do we go from here, but I think you covered it. Let me just give your book a shout out. I'll get the screen up. There we go, folks. That's one of the Good Doctor's books, The Sin of Empathy. This one, Leadership and Emotional Sabotage, plus all the others. Joe, which is the best place to grab copies of your books?
Yeah, if you want to go, you can buy them on Amazon, so they're available there, or you could go to sinofempathy.com, and you can also purchase them directly from the publisher. So you pick, and I hope that the book is an encouragement.
Yes, brilliant. Joe, stay on the line just so I can thank you properly when I've clicked off the record. I'm just going to play us out. Before I do that, friends at home, hope you've got as much out of this conversation as I have. If you could like and subscribe and click the notification bell, massive love to all of you. And I just want to give a shout out to the crew of the Sea Shepherd and say thank you ever so much for my t-shirt. Ciao, ciao.